On a cold, rainy night, a millionaire walks down a dark alley when he hears a child's voice that makes his heart stop. He spots a 5-year-old girl, barefoot and crying, clutching a worn-out blue stuffed bunny. With a voice trembling in desperation, she begs a drunken man, "Daddy, you promised to take care of me." The man staggers to his feet and yells that she deserves to be punished for speaking to her father that way. As he lunges toward the child, the millionaire steps in and does something that leaves everyone in shock. The rain hammered relentlessly against the wet asphalt, creating small rivers that snaked through the city gutters. Edward Mendez adjusted the collar of his expensive coat as he walked briskly through the deserted downtown streets. At 52, the businessman had built a financial empire few dared to challenge. But on that cold December night, he felt strangely vulnerable. His business meetings always ended late, and he preferred to walk to the parking garage rather than call his driver. The exercise helped him process the day's decisions, though his reflections were always solitary. Edward had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to share thoughts with another person. His empty mansion awaited him, just as it did every other night for the past 20 years. The echo of his footsteps reverberated between the buildings when a child's voice cut through the pre-dawn silence like a blade. It was a desperate sound, laden with an anguish that made his heart pound. Edward stopped abruptly, trying to pinpoint the source of the plea that seemed otherworldly. "Daddy, you promised you'd take care of me." The voice trembled with cold and desperation. Following the sound, Edward turned towards a narrow alley between two commercial buildings. The smell of wet garbage and urine assaulted his nostrils, but he continued advancing, guided by an instinct he couldn't explain. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone to use as a flashlight. The dim light revealed a scene that would be forever etched in his memory. A girl about 5 years old was kneeling before a man stumbling against the brick wall. Her brown hair was drenched, stuck to her pale, dirty face. She wore no shoes, and her ragged clothes barely protected her from the biting cold. In her small arms, she clutched a faded blue stuffed bunny, the only object that seemed to offer comfort. "Daddy, please, I'm hungry," the child pleaded, extending a trembling little hand towards the man. The man, clearly intoxicated, held a glass bottle and swayed precariously. His bloodshot eyes turned to the girl with a rage that chilled Edward to the bone. The businessman had never witnessed anything so disturbing in his sheltered and privileged life. "You deserve a beating for talking to me like that," the man yelled, his voice slurred by alcohol. "I'm your father, you ungrateful brat." Edward watched in horror as the man staggered up and lunged towards the child. The girl shrank back, clutching the bunny tighter, but didn't run. There was a resignation in her eyes that broke the businessman's heart. She had learned early on that she had nowhere to run. Without considering the consequences, Edward stepped out of the shadows and placed himself between the man and the child. His hands, which signed multi-million-dollar contracts with confidence, trembled as he shoved the drunkard back. The bottle slipped from the man's grasp and shattered against the wall, spilling shards of glass onto the wet ground. "Don't touch her," Edward said, his voice firmer than he expected. The man stared at him, trying to focus his blurry eyes. "Who are you? Stay out of my family." Ignoring the drunkard's words, Edward knelt beside the girl. Her large, frightened eyes watched him with a mixture of hope and terror. She had stopped crying, but her body still trembled violently. "It's okay," Edward murmured, extending his hand carefully. "I'll get you out of here." The girl hesitated, studying the stranger's face. Then, with a confidence that surprised him, she placed her tiny, cold hand in his. The touch was so fragile, Edward felt as if he were holding a wounded bird. As they emerged from the alley, Edward had no idea he had just found the person who would forever change his life. Fate had placed in his hands a responsibility he wasn't sure he was prepared to assume. The silence inside Edward's car was broken only by the sound of the girl's uneven breathing in the back seat. She had huddled in the corner, still clutching the blue bunny, and her large eyes kept tracking his every move in the rearview mirror. Edward adjusted the heater, noticing how she shivered, but didn't know what to say to reassure her. "What's your name?" he asked softly, lowering his voice so as not to frighten her. "Sophia," she replied in a barely audible whisper. "And you're not going to hurt me, are you?" The question hit Edward like a punch to the gut. What kind of life had that child lived for, that to be her first concern? He swallowed hard, feeling a mix of anger and sadness he had never experienced before. "Never, Sophia. I will never hurt you," he promised, looking at her through the mirror. "You're safe now." During the drive to his mansion, Edward tried to process what had happened. In 52 years of life, he had never dealt with a child. His routine was predictable: work, gym, business dinners, and loneliness. How would he care for a 5-year-old girl? What did she eat? How would he make her feel safe? When they arrived at the estate, Sophia observed the imposing house with amazement. The automatic lights illuminated the manicured garden, and she hugged the bunny tighter against her chest. Edward realized that, to her, that place must have seemed like another world. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her voice still trembling. "Yes, and you can stay here tonight, okay?" Sophia nodded, but Edward noticed she didn't let go of the door handle, as if ready to flee at any moment. Her mistrust was palpable, and he wondered how many times she had been let down by adults who were supposed to protect her. Inside the house, Edward turned on the lights in the foyer, and Sophia gaped at the crystal chandeliers and the polished marble. She walked slowly, her bare feet leaving small prints on the gleaming floor. The contrast between her battered appearance and the surrounding luxury was devastating. "You must be hungry," Edward said, trying to sound natural as he led her to the kitchen. "What do you like to eat?" Sophia shrugged. "Anything. I'm not picky." The simple answer revealed a history of deprivation Edward preferred not to imagine. He opened the refrigerator, which was practically empty. After all, he rarely cooked at home. He found some eggs, milk, and bread, deciding to make something simple a child might enjoy. While preparing scrambled eggs, Edward watched Sophia carefully explore the kitchen. She touched the appliances with reverence, as if they were sacred objects. When she approached the counter to watch him cook, he noticed small wounds on her arms and a scar on her forehead. "Does your bunny have a name?" he asked, trying to distract her from her own dark thoughts. "Blue," she replied, smiling for the first time. "My mom gave him to me when I was little." "Where is your mom now?" Sophia's smile vanished instantly. "Daddy said she left because she didn't like me anymore. Said she's never coming back." Edward felt a lump in his throat. The man's cruelty knew no bounds. How could someone make a child believe she was abandoned by her own mother? He served the eggs onto a colorful plate he found in the back of the cupboard. Probably a gift from some client he had never used. Sophia ate with desperate hunger, but with polite manners that surprised him. Between bites, she watched him cautiously, as if still expecting him to change his mind about helping her. "Where can I go tomorrow?" she suddenly asked, leaving Edward speechless. The question revealed the cruel reality. That girl had nowhere to go, no home, no family who wanted her, no guaranteed future. And now, inexplicably, she had become his responsibility. "You don't need to worry about that today," Edward replied, unaware of the promise he was making. "Today, you just need to sleep and feel safe." But as he prepared a guest room for Sophia, Edward knew his life had changed forever that rainy night. Morning arrived with rays of sun invading the guest room, but Edward hadn't slept. He spent the entire night checking on Sophia, watching her sleep, clutching the blue bunny. It was the first time in decades he had genuinely worried about someone else's well-being, and the feeling was overwhelming. When Sophia woke up, her eyes immediately searched for him, as if fearing it had all been a dream. Edward was sitting in the armchair beside the bed, still wearing the clothes from the day before, and smiled when he saw her wake up. "Good morning, Sophia. Did you sleep well?" She nodded shyly, sitting up in bed. "I thought you were going to leave during the night." "I'm not going anywhere," Edward replied, unaware of why he was making this promise. "How about we have breakfast?" In the following days, Edward cancelled all business meetings, telling his secretary he had a family emergency. It wasn't exactly a lie. Sophia had become the family he never knew he needed. He spent hours watching her, trying to understand her needs and fears. The girl was extraordinarily polite for her age, always asking permission before touching anything, and thanking him for every small gesture of kindness. But Edward noticed she never relaxed completely, always alert, like a wild animal ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. "Sophia, you can play with anything you want here," he said on the third day, seeing her gaze longingly at a bookshelf. "This is your home now." "For how long?" she asked, the question heavy with a sadness that broke Edward's heart. "As long as you want to stay." But even with his assurances, Sophia remained cautious. She ate little, slept lightly, and jumped at the slightest noise. Edward realized she had learned to survive in a state of constant alertness, and it revolted him deeply. On the fourth day, Edward decided he needed to buy clothes and shoes for Sophia. She had showered and was wearing one of his shirts, which covered her like a dress. When he suggested they go out to buy clothes, she panicked. "I don't want to go out," she said, hiding behind the armchair. "But what if he's out there?" Edward knelt down to her level, choosing his words carefully. "Who is he, Sophia?" "The man who said he's my father. He always finds me when I try to run away." The revelation left Edward cold. Sophia wasn't just traumatized. She was being stalked. The man in the alley wasn't just a neglectful father. He was a predator, deliberately terrorizing a child. "Did he hurt you other times?" Sophia discreetly showed him some scars on her arms. "When he drinks too much, he gets angry. Said I'm just like my mother and I deserve to be beaten." Edward felt a rage so intense he had to control himself not to yell. How could a man be so cruel to a defenseless child? He promised himself he would never let anyone hurt Sophia again. "He won't find you here," Edward said, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "I won't let him." That afternoon, Edward called his personal lawyer, Marcus Bell, a man he had known for 15 years and trusted completely. He explained the situation, omitting only a few details about how he had found Sophia. "Edward, you need to understand, this is complicated," Marcus said over the phone. "You can't just take someone else's child. Even if your intentions are good, there are legal procedures." "Then tell me what they are," Edward replied, determined. "I'll do whatever it takes." Marcus explained about adoption processes, temporary guardianship, and reporting child abuse. Everything seemed bureaucratic and time-consuming, while Sophia needed immediate protection. Edward realized he had entered a completely new world, where money and influence didn't guarantee quick solutions. When he hung up the phone, he found Sophia standing in the doorway, clutching Blue. She had overheard the conversation, and her silent tears revealed she had perfectly understood the situation. Are you going to turn me over to him?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Edward picked her up, feeling how light and fragile she was. "Never, Sophia. I will fight for you with everything I have." But deep down, he knew the battle had just begun. The intercom buzzed at 7 in the morning on a Friday, waking Edward from a restless sleep. He had spent the night planning how to resolve Sophia's legal situation, but hadn't expected reality to knock on his door so early. When he answered, the doorman's voice sounded tense. "Mr. Edward, there's a man here saying he's here to pick up his daughter. He's very agitated and insists you have a child that belongs to him." Edward's heart pounded. He knew exactly who it was, but wasn't prepared for this confrontation. Sophia was having breakfast in the kitchen, finally relaxed after a few days of security. How could he protect her without frightening her even more? "Don't let him in," Edward told the doorman. "I'll go down to talk to him." But before he could move, Sophia appeared in the living room, her eyes wide with terror. She had recognized the man's voice, even through the intercom, and her entire body trembled violently. "He found me," she whispered, hiding behind Edward. "I knew he would find me." Edward knelt down to her level, holding her shoulders firmly. "Sophia, look at me. You are safe. He's not getting in here. I promise." But his words were interrupted by shouts coming from the gate. The man was screaming obscenities and threats, his drunken voice echoing through the complex. Edward realized he needed to act quickly before the situation got out of control. "Go to your room and lock the door," Edward instructed. "Don't come out until I get back." Sophia ran upstairs, clutching Blue, and Edward went down to confront the man who had tormented that child for so long. When he reached the gate, he found a middle-aged, overly thin man with dirty clothes and bloodshot eyes. The smell of alcohol was nauseating even from a distance. "Where's my daughter?" the man yelled, gripping the gate bars tightly. "You can't keep her. She's mine." "She's not your property," Edward replied, trying to stay calm. "She's a child who needs care." "Care?" The man laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than me because you have money? I'm her father. I have rights." Edward looked at the man with disgust. Rights? What rights did someone who mistreated a child have? But he knew that, legally, the situation was complicated. The man was technically correct about having parental rights, even being a terrible father. "If you really care about her, you can visit when you're sober," Edward said, trying to negotiate. But she's not going back to live in an alley." "She's coming back with me today." The man shook the gate violently. "If you don't hand her over now, I'm calling the police. I'll say you kidnapped my daughter." The threat hit Edward like a blow. Could he really be accused of kidnapping? He had taken Sophia from the alley without legal permission, driven only by the desire to protect her. From a legal standpoint, perhaps he was indeed a kidnapper. "You have 5 minutes to bring her out here," the man continued, his voice growing more aggressive. "Or I'm calling the cops, and you'll see what happens to rich folks who steal children." Edward went upstairs, his mind in a whirl. He found Sophia hiding under the bed, crying silently. He lay down on the floor beside her, speaking in a low voice. "Sophia, I need to tell you something important. That man said he's going to call the police. Will they take me away?" she asked, her voice muffled by the blanket. "I won't let that happen, but we might need to talk to some people." "Explain what happened." Sophia crawled out from under the bed, her eyes red from crying. "He always says no one will believe me, says I'm a liar and everyone will take his side." Edward felt a fierce determination grow in his chest. No matter what it took, he would not allow that child to return to a life of abuse and neglect. He discovered he had a much bigger heart than he imagined, and now he needed to use all his intelligence and resources to protect Sophia. "He's lying," Edward said, holding her small hands. "There are good people who will help us. You just need to trust me." But when the intercom buzzed again, announcing the police arrival, Edward realized the real battle was just beginning. 2 police officers entered Edward's living room, their gazes sweeping over the luxurious surroundings with a degree of suspicion. Sergeant Martinez, an experienced middle-aged man, took the lead in the conversation, while his partner, Officer Silva, took notes in a small notebook. "Mr. Edward Mendez," Martinez began, "we received a report that you are holding a child against the will of her biological father. May we speak with the girl?" Edward took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. He knew every word would be crucial at that moment. "Of course, but first I need to explain the circumstances under which I found her." He recounted the alley incident, describing the deplorable state Sophia was in and the violence he witnessed. The officers listened in silence, but Edward noticed skepticism in their eyes. It was his word against that of a father who technically had legal rights over the child. "Where was the child sleeping before coming here?" Officer Silva asked. "In the alley. She told me she had no home because her father sold everything to buy alcohol. Martinez frowned. Mr. Edward, we understand your concern, but we cannot base legal decisions solely on your account. We need to hear all sides. Outside, Sophia's father continued shouting, his drunken voice demanding his daughter back. Edward could feel the officer's discomfort with the situation. It was obvious the man was intoxicated, but that didn't automatically nullify his parental rights. "May I speak with the girl?" Martinez asked. Edward hesitated. Sophia was terrified, hiding in the bedroom, and he feared the officer's presence would traumatize her even further. But he also knew he had no choice. Refusing could worsen his legal situation. "She's very frightened. Could you be gentle with her?" When they went upstairs to get Sophia, Edward found her huddled in the corner of the room, clutching the blue bunny. Her eyes were red from crying, and she trembled visibly upon seeing the uniforms. "Hi, Sophia," Officer Silva said, crouching down to the child's level. "I'm Officer Silva. We just want to talk to you, okay?" Sophia clung to Edward's leg, whispering, "Are they going to take me away?" "No one is going to take you now," Edward replied, stroking her hair. "We're just asking some questions." The conversation with Sophia was revealing. In a trembling voice, she recounted the nights in the alley, the constant hunger, and the times her father hurt her when he was drunk. She discreetly showed the scars on her arms, explaining how each one had been inflicted. Martinez and Silva exchanged meaningful glances. It was impossible to pretend they didn't see the signs of abuse, but the legal situation remained complicated. They had to follow protocol, even when it was obvious the child was better off away from her biological father. "Sophia, where is your mother?" Silva asked gently. "Daddy said she left because she didn't like me," Sophia replied, lowering her eyes. "Said she's never coming back." Edward noticed the officers seemed visibly uncomfortable with the answer. A mother who simply abandoned her young daughter. Something was wrong with that story, but they couldn't investigate everything at the moment. When they came back downstairs, Sophia's father was gone. The doorman reported that he had left muttering threats, but promising to return. His absence further complicated the situation. The officers couldn't assess his condition or ask important questions. "Mr. Edward," Martinez said, putting away his notebook, "we'll need to involve Child Protective Services. This situation needs to be assessed by specialized social workers." Edward felt the ground slip out from under him. CPS meant bureaucracy, investigations, and possibly Sophia being placed in a shelter while they decided her fate. All he wanted was to protect her, but the system seemed determined to complicate things. "How long will this take?" he asked. "It could take weeks or months," Silva admitted. But the child can stay here temporarily, as long as you commit to cooperating with all investigations." Edward looked at Sophia, who watched him with eyes full of fear and hope. He had no idea how to navigate the legal system, but knew he couldn't give up on her now. "I'll do whatever it takes," he promised, unaware that this would be just the first of many battles he would have to face. 3 days after the police visit, social worker Carla Davis arrived at Edward's mansion with a folder full of forms and a professional expression that didn't reveal her intentions. She was a 40-year-old woman, experienced in child abuse cases, but also cautious with situations involving influential people. "Mr. Edward, I need to assess the conditions under which Sophia is living and better understand your motivation for taking care of her," Carla said, sitting down in the living room. Edward had prepared for this moment, organizing documents proving his financial and moral suitability. But he sensed Carla observing him with some skepticism, as if suspecting ulterior motives behind his generosity. "Is it natural for a single man, with no experience with children, to be so interested in a stranger?" she asked directly. The question hit Edward like a slap. He had feared his motives would be questioned, but didn't expect such a direct approach. He took a deep breath before answering. "Carla, I saw a child being mistreated and couldn't just ignore it. I know my situation is unusual, but my only motivation is Sophia's well-being." Carla took notes, but her expression remained neutral. "Where does she sleep? How do you organize the routine? Who takes care of her when you work?" Edward showed her the room he had specially decorated for Sophia, with children's furniture he ordered online. He explained how he had rearranged his schedule to be present, hired an experienced nanny for times he needed to leave, and enrolled Sophia in a nearby private school. "In just 1 week, you've structured a complete life for her," Carla observed. "This shows dedication, but also raises questions about impulsivity." When Sophia was called to talk, Edward noticed how much she had changed in a few days. She was wearing colorful clothes, her hair shone clean and styled, and she had gained a little weight, but most importantly was the sparkle in her eyes. She no longer looked like a frightened animal. "Sophia, do you like living here?" Carla asked gently. "Very much," Sophia replied, hugging Blue. "Uncle Edward is good to me. He doesn't yell and always gives me food when I'm hungry." "And do you miss your father?" Sophia pondered for a moment. "I miss when he didn't drink. Sometimes he was nice and told stories, but when he drinks, he gets very angry." Carla asked more questions about the routine, Sophia's fears, and her plans for the future. The girl answered with touching sincerity, revealing details about her previous life that broke Edward's heart. "Uncle Edward said I'll be able to go to school and make friends," Sophia said, smiling. "I never went to real school before." After Sophia went out to play in the garden, Carla turned to Edward with a more serious expression. "I need to be honest with you. The girl's father visited the Child Protective Services yesterday, claiming you seduced her away from him." Edward felt his blood run cold. "That's an absurd lie." "I know it probably is, but these allegations complicate the situation. He's demanding his daughter back and threatening to sue you for kidnapping and other more serious charges." The reality hit Edward like a hammer. He had underestimated that man's capacity for manipulation. It wasn't enough that he had mistreated Sophia. Now he was willing to destroy the reputation of anyone trying to help her. "What does this mean for Sophia?" Edward asked, trying to control the desperation in his voice. "It means we need to be very careful. I will recommend that she remain in your temporary care, but with constant supervision. Any slip-up could be used against you." Carla explained there would be surprise visits, weekly reports, and a complete psychological evaluation of Sophia. The process would be long and invasive, but it was the only way to protect both the child and Edward from the malicious accusations. When Carla left, Edward found Sophia in the garden, playing with a new doll. She ran to him with a radiant smile, unaware of the storms approaching. "Uncle Edward, did the lady say I can stay here?" "For now, yes, my dear," he replied, hugging her tightly. "But maybe other people will come visit to make sure you're happy." Sophia nodded, confident. "They'll see I'm happy here. You make me feel safe." Edward looked at the sky beginning to darken, knowing that the next few weeks would be a battle for the soul of an innocent child. The discovery happened by chance when Edward was helping Sophia organize her few personal belongings. She had kept some crumpled papers in the inside pocket of Blue the bunny, documents she considered too important to leave behind. When she laid them out to dry after washing them, Edward noticed something that made his heart stop. It was a deteriorated but still legible birth certificate. The father's name listed was not the man from the alley. It was Rafael Santos, deceased 3 years prior. The man who had been terrorizing Sophia and claiming parental rights was, in fact, just a stepfather. "Sophia," Edward called gently, holding the document with trembling hands. "Who is Rafael Santos?" Sophia's eyes instantly filled with tears. "He was my real daddy. He died when I was 2. Mommy was very sad." Edward felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath his feet. "And the man from the alley? He married Mommy after Daddy died. At first, he was nice, But then he started drinking and getting angry with us. The revelation changed everything. If that man wasn't Sophia's biological father, he had no automatic parental rights. But this also meant there was a much more complex and dark story behind the girl's situation. "Sophia, where is your real mother?" Edward asked, bracing himself for an answer he feared hearing. "He said she left, but I heard him talking on the phone once," Sophia whispered, looking around as if still afraid of being overheard. "He told someone that Mommy was safely kept and that no one would find her." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. Sophia's words suggested something far more sinister than abandonment. That man hadn't just been neglectful. He had done something to Sophia's mother. That same afternoon, Edward called Marcus Bell, sharing the discovery. Marcus's reaction was immediate and alarming. "Edward, this changes the legal landscape completely. If this man isn't the biological father and the mother is missing, this could be a case of kidnapping or worse. We need to involve the police immediately." But when Edward tried to locate information about Sophia's mother, Helena Santos, he discovered something even more disturbing. There were records indicating she was admitted to a psychiatric clinic 2 years earlier, after her husband claimed she had developed severe mental disorders and posed a danger to her daughter. "As Uncle Edward, why are you sad?" Sophia asked, climbing onto his lap as he researched on the computer. Edward closed the screen, not wanting her to see the information about her mother. "I'm trying to better understand your story, my dear. Do you remember your mother?" Sophia's face lit up for the first time in days. "Mommy was beautiful and smelled like flowers. She used to sing me to sleep and braid my hair. But one day, men in white coats came to get her, and she screamed a lot." Edward hugged Sophia tightly, trying to process the gravity of the situation. The mother hadn't abandoned her daughter. She had been forcibly removed, likely against her will. The stepfather had orchestrated everything to gain full control over Sophia and, possibly, over the assets the girl had inherited from her biological father. When he put Sophia to bed that night, Edward stayed up late researching the clinic where Helena was admitted. What he discovered made him nauseous. The institution had a history of questionable admissions, always based on dubious medical reports provided by relatives interested in inheritance or child custody. The next day, Edward made a decision that would change the course of the entire investigation. He would visit the clinic personally, even knowing it could put him in danger. If Helena Santos was alive and institutionalized against her will, he needed to find the truth. But first, he needed to ensure Sophia's safety. The stepfather wasn't just a neglectful alcoholic. He was a dangerous man who had destroyed an entire family to satisfy his greed. And now that Edward possessed evidence that could destroy him, both he and Sophia were in real danger. As he watched Sophia sleep peacefully, clutching the blue bunny, Edward realized he had become part of something much bigger than he had imagined. He wasn't just saving a child. He was about to uncover a network of corruption and abuse that had shattered innocent lives. The battle that awaited him would be far more dangerous than any business negotiation he had ever faced. Edward left Sophia with Marina, the trusted nanny he had hired, and drove to St. Jude's Clinic, located 2 hours from the city. During the drive, his heart pounded erratically as he imagined what he might find. If Helena was indeed institutionalized against her will, how many years of suffering had she endured, separated from her daughter? The clinic was an old building surrounded by high walls, with an appearance more like a prison than a hospital. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a bored expression, barely looked up when Edward introduced himself. "I'd like to visit Helena Santos Silva," he said, trying to sound casual. "She doesn't receive visitors," the woman replied dryly. "Medical orders. The family has forbidden any outside contact." Edward had expected this answer. "I'm the family lawyer," he lied, quickly showing his ID. "I need information about her treatment for an inheritance lawsuit." The lie worked partially. The receptionist directed him to Dr. Thompson, the doctor responsible for Helena's case. When Edward entered the office, he found a 60-year-old man, balding, with nervous eyes that revealed discomfort with questions about his patients. "Helena Santos Silva has been under my care for 2 years, the doctor explained, consulting a file. Severe bipolar disorder with psychotic episodes. Her husband brought her in after she tried to assault their young daughter." Edward knew he was hearing lies, but maintained a neutral expression. "Can I speak with her? It's about the inheritance Sophia received from her biological father." Dr. Thompson hesitated, his fingers drumming nervously on the desk. "She has moments of lucidity, but most of the time she is confused. Perhaps it would be better to speak directly with the husband." "Actually, I'm here because the husband is under investigation for neglecting the child," Edward said, observing the doctor's reaction. "The girl was found living on the streets." The change in Dr. Thompson's expression was instantaneous. He visibly paled and began flipping through papers with excessive nervousness. Edward realized he had touched a sensitive point. This is very concerning," the doctor murmured. "Helena always asks about her daughter, says she needs to pick her up, that she's in danger. And you thought those were delusions. The husband always said the child was well cared for. He brought photos." Edward felt a growing anger. "Dr. Thompson, I need to speak with Helena. This is a matter of life and death for a 5-year-old child." After much hesitation, the doctor agreed to take Edward to Helena, but only for 5 minutes and under his supervision. They walked through dimly lit corridors until they reached a wing that looked more like a prison, with locked doors and barred windows. Helena Santos Silva was sitting in a plastic chair, staring out the window of her small, sterile room. When she turned to see who had arrived, Edward was shocked by her appearance. She was a young woman, perhaps 30 years old, but looked 50. Her eyes, however, were completely lucid and filled with hope upon seeing an unfamiliar face. "You came for Sophia?" she asked immediately, getting up with difficulty. "Please, tell me she's okay. I dream about her every night." Edward looked at Dr. Thompson, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable. "Helena, Sophia is safe with me, but I need to know the truth about what happened." "He brought me here by force," Helena said, grabbing Edward's arm. "Said I was crazy, that I tried to hurt my daughter. But it's a lie. I would never hurt Sophia. He wanted to get rid of me to get Sophia's inheritance." Dr. Thompson tried to interrupt. "Helena, you're having another episode." "I'm not crazy," Helena yelled, tears streaming down her face. "He gave me strange medication. Hit me when Sophia wasn't looking. I tried to run away with her, but he found us." Edward felt like he was putting together a terrible puzzle. What inheritance did Sophia inherit? "Raphael left a savings account and life insurance," Helena explained quickly. "It was almost $100,000. He said it was to ensure Sophia's future, but that man wanted it all." The final revelation dropped like a bomb. It wasn't just about abuse and neglect. It was an elaborate case of embezzlement and false imprisonment. The stepfather had institutionalized Helena to gain legal access to Sophia's money, using the child as collateral for his vices. "Dr. Thompson," Edward said, his voice filled with authority, "I need Helena's complete medical records, and I need to know who authorized this admission." The doctor was visibly panicked now. I just followed protocols." "The husband brought documents." Edward realized he had only uncovered the tip of the iceberg. How many other patients were institutionalized under questionable circumstances? How many families had been destroyed by this scheme? But his priority now was to reunite Helena and Sophia and ensure both were safe before the stepfather discovered that his web of lies was unraveling. Edward left the clinic with a folder full of documents that Dr. Thompson had handed him with trembling hands, fearing the consequences of his complicity in the scheme. During the drive back, he called Marcus Bell, relating everything he had discovered. Marcus's response was alarming. "Edward, You need to leave town immediately. If this man finds out you found Helena, both you and Sophia will be in mortal danger. We're dealing with people who didn't hesitate to destroy an entire family. But Edward couldn't simply flee and leave Helena in the clinic. She had suffered 2 years of false imprisonment, forcibly medicated and separated from her daughter. Every minute that passed was torture for a mother who didn't know if her child was alive or dead. When he arrived home, he found Sophia playing in the garden with Marina, oblivious to the whirlwind of events unfolding around her. Upon seeing him, she ran into his arms with the radiant smile she had learned to give in the last few days of security. "Uncle Edward, Marina taught me how to make bracelets. Want to see?" Edward hugged Sophia tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. How could he explain to a 5-year-old girl that her mother was alive and that they would be reunited soon? How to prepare a traumatized girl for another radical change in her life? "Sophia, I need to tell you something very important," he said, sitting down on the garden floor beside her. "I found out your mommy is alive." Sophia's eyes widened, and blue fell from her hands. "Mommy is alive. Where is she? Why didn't she come get me?" "She's in a place where bad men kept her away from you, but we're going to get her, and you'll be together again." Sophia started crying, but they were tears of relief and joy. "I knew she hadn't abandoned me. I knew she loved me." That night, Edward developed a plan with Detective Anna Miller and her specialized legal team. They would file a lawsuit to free Helena while simultaneously reporting the clinic's illegal admission scheme. But they knew they had to act quickly before those involved destroyed evidence. The call came at 2 in the morning. The intercom buzzed insistently, and the doorman's voice sounded nervous. "Mr. Edward, there are several men here saying they are social workers. They have a court order to take the girl." Edward felt his blood run cold. It was 2 in the morning. Social workers didn't conduct removals in the middle of the night. He looked out the window and saw 3 cars parked in front of the gate. He immediately recognized one of them. It was the stepfather's old dented car. "Don't let anyone in," he instructed the doorman. "Call the police immediately." Edward ran to Sophia's room. Finding her awake and frightened by the noise, she clung to him, trembling with fear. "It's him, isn't it?" she whispered. "He came to get me." "I won't let anyone take you," Edward promised, picking her up. "We're going to a safe place." He had prepared an emergency bag after talking with Marcus, anticipating that something like this might happen. "Where are we going?" Sophia asked, clutching Blue tightly as Edward drove through the empty streets in the early morning hours. "To a hotel where we'll stay until we get your mother," Edward explained. But when they arrived at the hotel Marcus had booked, they discovered their reservation had been cancelled. The receptionist, visibly nervous, said he had received a call informing him that Edward Mendez was being investigated for child kidnapping. Edward realized his pursuers had broader connections than he imagined. They could track his movements and influence people even before he arrived at places. It was clear the scheme involved more people than just Sophia's stepfather. Driving aimlessly through the dark streets, Edward called Marcus. "They know our every move. How is this possible?" "Edward, I just discovered something terrible," Marcus replied, his voice tense. "The judge who signed Helena's admission order also signed several other suspicious admissions. We're dealing with a network of corruption involving the judiciary." Edward stopped the car at a 24-hour gas station, trying to organize his thoughts. Sophia slept in the back seat, exhausted by the stress of the escape. Looking at her, Edward made the most difficult decision of his life. He couldn't keep running with Sophia while Helena remained imprisoned. It was time to directly confront those who had destroyed a family, even if it meant risking his own life. But first, he needed to ensure Sophia's absolute safety, far from the reach of those who saw her merely as a means of blackmail and control. Edward was about to start the car when a soft knock on the window made him jump. Outside, a woman of about 50 years held up a civil police badge. Detective Anna Miller had kind but determined eyes. and made a gesture for him to roll down the window. "Mr. Edward Mendez, I'm Detective Miller. I know you're being pursued, and I've come to offer help." Edward hesitated, remembering Marcus's advice about trusting no one, but something in the detective's demeanor reassured him. She hadn't arrived with sirens or other officers. She was clearly acting unofficially. "How did you find me?" he asked, keeping the car running for a possible escape. "I've been investigating this scheme for months," Anna Beatrice explained. "Several families have reported forced institutionalizations and disappearances of children. When I learned you visited St. Jude's Clinic today, I knew our cases were connected." Sophia woke up in the back seat, rubbing her eyes. Upon seeing the officer, she hid behind the seat, still traumatized by previous experiences with authorities who hadn't protected her. "It's okay, my dear," Edward said, stroking her hair. "This lady came to help us." Anna Beatrice crouched down to the window level, addressing Sophia directly in a soft voice. "Hi, Sophia. I'm looking for your mommy too. Do you want to help us save her?" Sophia's eyes lit up with hope. "Do you know my mommy? I know where she is, and I know she's suffering far from you. But I need both of you to help me free her." The detective explained she had built a solid case against the corruption network, but needed more evidence to arrest everyone involved. Edward was the key to connecting Sophia's stepfather to the larger scheme, as he had meticulously documented everything. "How many other families are suffering?" Edward asked. "At least 15 confirmed cases in the last 3 years. Always the same pattern. A relative interested in inheritance or benefits forcibly institutionalizes the family member who has legal rights over children or assets." Anna Beatrice took them to a safe house the police used to protect witnesses. It was a discreet location with 24-hour security where Sophia could stay safe while they planned Helena's rescue. "When are we going to get Mommy?" Sophia asked, hugging Blue as she observed the new environment. "Very soon," the detective promised. "But first, we need to make sure you both will be safe forever." Edward spent the night planning with Anna Beatrice and her specialized team. They discovered the scheme involved not only the clinic, but also corrupt county clerks that falsified documents, doctors who provided fraudulent reports, and even Child Protective Services employees who facilitated illegal child removals. "Sophia's stepfather is just a pawn," Anna Beatrice explained. "The real leader is Dr. Richard Vance, owner of several private clinics. He offers solutions for families who want to get rid of inconvenient relatives." Edward felt nauseous imagining how many innocent people were suffering in institutions controlled by that man. Helena was just one victim among dozens, perhaps hundreds. "How will we prove all this?" Edward asked. "With your help. You're going to meet Sophia's stepfather, pretending you want to negotiate. We'll record everything, get evidence that he's blackmailing you and exploiting the child." The idea of meeting that man disgusted Edward, but he knew it was necessary, not just to save Sophia and Helena, but to stop other families from being destroyed. "And what if something goes wrong?" Edward asked, looking at Sophia, who slept on the sofa. "It won't," Anna Beatrice replied with determination. "We have a prepared team, state-of-the-art equipment, and you won't be alone at any moment." The next day, Edward received a call from the stepfather, as the detective had predicted. The man was desperate, knowing his web of lies was unraveling. "You have until tomorrow to give me the girl and $50,000, he said, his voice thick with alcohol and desperation. "If you don't, you'll never see daylight again, and the brat will disappear forever." Edward took a deep breath, remembering Anna Beatrice's instructions. "Udi, where do you want to meet? The same alley where you found her, midnight, and come alone, or the deal is off?" When he hung up, Edward looked at Sophia, who was playing with a new doll the detective had bought. Soon, that brave girl would have her mother back and a real chance to be happy. But first, he needed to face the man who had caused so much suffering, knowing that one wrong word could ruin everything. The rain fell again that night, creating the same somber atmosphere as 3 weeks ago, when Edward had found Sophia for the first time. At 11:45 p.m., he positioned himself at the entrance of the alley, wearing a nearly invisible microphone connected to Detective Anna Beatrice's team, who were strategically positioned in the surrounding buildings. "Remember, Edward," Anna Beatrice's voice said through the earpiece, "let him speak first. We need him to confess as much as possible." Edward took a deep breath, trying to control his nerves. His life had transformed completely in the past few weeks. From a solitary businessman, he had become a protective father. And now he was about to become the key to dismantling a criminal network that destroyed entire families. The stepfather appeared punctually at midnight, stumbling slightly, but more sober than Edward had ever seen him. His eyes held a dangerous determination, like a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. "Where's my money?" he asked without preamble, approaching Edward aggressively. "First, I want assurances," Edward replied, following the agreed-upon script. "How do I know you won't keep blackmailing me after I pay?" The man laughed bitterly. "Because if you don't pay now, I'll make the brat disappear like I did with her mother, and it won't be in some fancy clinic this time." Edward felt a chill, but forced himself to continue. "What did you do to Helena? The troublesome one. She's rotting in a padded cell, drugged out of her mind. Dr. Vance guarantees she'll never get her right mind back. And you know why? Because she tried to stop me from getting the money that's rightfully mine." Edward feigned ignorance, though he already knew about Sophia's inheritance. $100,000 the idiot first husband left for the brat. That money is mine. I took care of her for 2 years. I deserve to be paid for my trouble. The detective had instructed Edward to get him to confess about other cases, to strengthen the evidence against the entire network. "How did you manage to get Helena institutionalized without anyone suspecting?" The stepfather boasted, clearly proud of his scheme. "Dr. Vance has contacts everywhere. Judges, doctors, social workers. They're all in his pocket. We institutionalize whoever we want for as long as we want. We've already done it to over 20 people who got in the way of family plans." Edward forced himself to remain calm while listening to that monstrous confession. 20 people, 20 families destroyed by the greed and cruelty of those criminals. "And what if I don't pay? Then the brat will have an accident. She'll be found in the river in a few days, and you'll be charged with kidnapping and murder. Dr. Vance has already prepared the false evidence." It was at that moment Edward realized he was dealing with a psychopath completely devoid of humanity. That man was planning to murder a 5-year-old child just for money. "All right," Edward said, feigning acceptance of the blackmail, "but I want to see Helena first, to make sure she's alive." "You're smarter than I thought," the stepfather said, pulling out an old cell phone. "Dr. Vance is waiting for your call. He'll explain the conditions for you to see the lunatic." As the man dialed, Edward heard Detective Miller's voice in his earpiece. "Perfect, Edward. We have everything recorded. Now let's arrest him." But at that moment, the stepfather noticed something strange in Edward's behavior. Perhaps it was the lack of genuine fear, or the way he maintained a strangely calm demeanor for someone being blackmailed. "You're recording, aren't you?" he yelled, pulling a knife from his pocket. "You betrayed me!" Edward tried to pull back, but the man was faster, grabbing him by the arm and pressing the blade against his neck. "If there are cops here, they'll watch you die." "Police! Armed suspect!" Detective Miller shouted over the radio, and immediately the alley filled with lights and sirens. The stepfather panicked, using Edward as a human shield as he tried to find an escape route. "I'll kill him!" "I swear I'll kill him. Drop the weapon!" Detective Miller shouted, approaching with her pistol drawn. "You're surrounded." It was then that Edward remembered the self-defense classes he had taken years before. With a swift move, he managed to break free from the man's arm and shove him against the wall. The knife clattered onto the wet ground, and seconds later, the stepfather was handcuffed and being led to the patrol car. "You don't understand," he screamed as he was placed in the car. "Dr. Vance has protection everywhere. He'll get out of this, and you'll pay dearly." Edward leaned against the alley wall, breathing heavily. He had just faced the man who had terrorized Sophia for years, and finally, the girl was free from his threats. But the battle wasn't over yet. Dr. Vance and his corruption ring still needed to be dismantled, and Helena was still imprisoned, waiting for freedom and reunion with the daughter she hadn't seen in 2 years. The morning after the confrontation in the alley, Edward woke up at the safe house to find Sophia playing calmly on the floor, while Detective Miller organized an operation that would change the fate of dozens of families. The evidence collected the previous night was sufficient to obtain search and seizure warrants against the entire criminal network. "Today's the day, Sophia," Edward said, kneeling beside her. "Today, we're going to get your mommy." Sophia's eyes lit up with a hope that had been suffocated by 2 years of separation. "Will she remember me? I've grown so much." "Mothers never forget their children," Edward replied, hugging her. "She thought of you every day." At 10 in the morning, a task force composed of police officers, district attorneys, and forensic doctors simultaneously headed to 5 locations: St. Jude's Clinic, Dr. Vance's office, 2 suspect county clerk offices, and a security company that supplied corrupt employees to the institutions. Edward accompanied the team going to the clinic, bringing Sophia so she could reunite with her mother immediately after her release. During the drive, he prepared the girl for what she might encounter. "Your mother might be weak or confused because of the medication they gave her," he explained gently. "But when she sees you, she'll be okay again." When they arrived at the clinic, they found Dr. Thompson trying to destroy documents in the parking lot. Detective Miller apprehended him immediately, while her team spread throughout the building to locate all patients admitted irregularly. Edward followed the officers through the corridors he had walked the day before, but this time with Sophia holding his hand tightly. The girl was nervous, but determined to reunite with the mother she had cried for during so many lonely nights. "Mommy!" Sophia shouted when she saw Helena through the room's glass window. Helena was sitting in the same plastic chair, staring outside. But when she heard her daughter's voice, she turned around with an expression of utter disbelief. "Sophia, my girl?" Helena stood up with difficulty, her hands trembling as she tried to process if she was dreaming or if her daughter was really there. When the door opened, Sophia ran into Helena's arms, and they both broke down in tears. Edward watched the reunion with tear-filled eyes, realizing that this moment justified all the risks he had taken. "I knew you would come back for me," Helena cried, showering Sophia's face with kisses. "I never stopped believing." "Mommy, Uncle Edward saved me," Sophia said, pointing to Edward. "He gave me food, clothes, and promised we'd find you." Helena looked at Edward with gratitude that couldn't be expressed in words. "How can I ever thank you for taking care of my daughter?" "Seeing you together again," Edward replied, his voice thick with emotion. "That's enough." While Helena received medical attention to reverse the effects of the medication she'd been forced to take, Detective Miller coordinated the release of other patients. In total, 18 people were found admitted irregularly, some for over 3 years. Dr. Vance was arrested at his office, attempting to transfer money to offshore accounts. During the search, files were found detailing hundreds of cases of fraudulent admissions, document forgery, and embezzlement of inheritances and benefits. "This operation will make history," Detective Miller told Edward. "You helped dismantle one of the country's largest family exploitation rings." But for Edward, what truly mattered was happening in the clinic's garden, where Sophia was showing Helena the bunny blue, recounting all the adventures they had shared during their separation. "He gave me courage when I was scared," Sophia explained, "and he always reminded me that you loved me." Helena hugged her daughter tightly, whispering promises that they would never be separated again. "Let's go home, my princess. Let's build a new life." Edward watched mother and daughter walk hand in hand towards the car, that would take them to freedom, and felt a profound satisfaction that no business success had ever provided. He had discovered that true wealth wasn't in his bank accounts, but in the ability to use his resources to protect the most vulnerable. When they arrived at the police station to formalize Helena's release and Sophia's permanent custody, Edward realized his journey as protector was coming to an end. Sophia would return to her biological mother's care, as she should. But then Helena asked a question that changed everything. "Edward, would you like to be Sophia's godfather? After all you've done for us, you've become family." Edward looked at Sophia, who smiled hopefully, and at Helena, who watched him with sincere gratitude. At that moment, he realized he had found something he had sought his entire life, a true family, built not by blood ties, but by the bonds of love and mutual care. 3 months had passed since Helena's rescue, and life had found a new rhythm for everyone. Edward was in his mansion, helping Sophia with her math homework, while Helena prepared dinner in the kitchen. The house that once echoed with loneliness now vibrated with laughter, conversations, and the soft music Helena liked to listen to while cooking. "Uncle Edward, this problem is really hard," Sophia complained, pouting as she looked at the numbers in her notebook. "Let's think about it together," Edward said, sitting beside her. "If you have 5 dolls and your mum gives you 3 more, how many do you have in total?" Sophia counted on her fingers, concentrating. 8. "But I prefer playing with blue." The blue bunny occupied a place of honor on the shelf in Sophia's new room, in the house Edward had bought for Helena and her to live in. It was a smaller residence than his mansion, but full of light and warmth, located in the same neighborhood so they could see each other every day. "And the other cases?" Helena asked, serving dessert to everyone. 17 families have been reunited," replied Detective Miller, who had become a close friend. Dr. Vance was sentenced to 15 years in prison, and the entire network was dismantled. Sophia's stepfather got 8 years for extortion and threats. Edward watched Sophia playing on the floor with a new doll, completely oblivious to the legal complexities that had determined her fate. She had transformed into a normal child, curious and cheerful, who went to school every day and had made several friends. "Uncle Edward," Sophia said, running to him after dinner, "my teacher asked me to write about my family. Can I write about you too?" "Of course, Princess, but remember to say that your mother is the most important person in your life." "I'm going to write that I have 2 most important people," Sophia replied, smiling. "Mommy and my heart dad." Edward felt tears prick his eyes. At that moment, he realized he had found not just a family, but also a greater purpose for his life. His financial resources now had a profound meaning. They were tools to protect other children like Sophia and reunite other families like theirs. "Edward," Helena said that night after Sophia had fallen asleep, "I have a proposal for you." They were on the porch of the house, watching the stars shining in the clear sky. Edward had grown accustomed to these moments of quiet conversation when they could reflect on the day and plan for the future. "And Sophia wants you to officially become her godfather," Helena continued. "She wants to have a ceremony with a party and everything. What do you think?" Edward smiled, imagining Sophia planning all the details of a party to make official what was already a reality in their hearts. "I think that would be the honor of my life." 3 months later, in a moving ceremony at the same church where Raphael had been baptized, Edward formalized his role as Sophia's godfather. Detective Miller was the godmother, and the entire team that had worked on the case was present to celebrate. Sophia wore a white dress with blue accents, the color of blue, and carried her bunny in her arms throughout the ceremony. When the priest asked if Edward promised to care for and protect Sophia for the rest of her life, his answer echoed through the church: "I promise forever and a day more." After the party, as they were at home organizing the gifts Sophia had received, she asked a question that perfectly summarized the journey they had taken together. "Uncle Edward, do you regret finding me in that alley?" Edward knelt down to her level, holding her small hands tenderly. "Sophia, finding you was the most important thing that happened in my life. You taught me that true wealth lies in the people we love. And you taught me that there are good adults who protect children," she replied, hugging him tightly. Helena watched the embrace between her daughter and the man who had become much more than a hero. He had become family. At that moment, she knew Sophia would grow up knowing she was unconditionally loved and would always have a safe place in the world. Edward looked around the house filled with laughter, toys, and love, and realized his transformation was complete. The solitary businessman had found his true calling: to be a father, protector, and defender of those most in need of care. Outside, the rain began to fall again, but this time there was nothing somber about it. It was just rain, washing the world towards a new beginning, just as that night in the alley had washed Edward's soul and given him a new life. Sophia fell asleep on the sofa, between Edward and Helena, clutching Blue as they planned the next adventures they would share as a family. And for the first time in his life, Edward Mendez knew for sure that he was exactly where he was meant to be.